Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode around the fire on Spirit Reflections. I'm Fred Govea, and tonight we're going to talk about philosophy. What's the point of it? What can all of these ancient Greek teachings and all of those wise people who thought so many advanced things, what can they teach us today? We're going to talk with Professor Melissa Costa, who has been teaching ethics and philosophy with New Acropolis for the last 20 years. So if you're live, ask your questions, your comments below. And if you're not live, check out New Acropolis USA. They're expanding into many schools and they're offering live courses on ethics, on philosophy, and all of the intricate aspects that the ancient wisdom of the Greeks brought to us nowadays. So, without further ado, let us welcome around the fire on Spirit Reflections, Professor Melissa. Hello, Melissa. Welcome.
Hello, Fred. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here actually based in Brasilia, in Brazil. And thank you for the invitation. And I'm happy to share with you a little bit about New Acropolis and the work we are doing in the US.
Beautiful. I invite everybody to like and subscribe and follow Spirit Reflections. This is a channel, Melissa, for people that are curious about spiritual topics. And in the process, we get to know ourselves. Or I always say this. And with philosophy, I believe and I suspect that it is a way for which we get to know ourselves more. So if somebody were to be coming across this video right now on YouTube, what is the point of philosophy? How would you answer that?
Philosophy, Fred, it's very interesting. But the word itself, it comes from Greek. And it's actually a combination of two words. It's philia, which is love or friendship, and sophia, which is wisdom. So it's pretty much love for wisdom. So philosophy has to do with looking for the major questions in life. Who are we? What are we doing here? What's our purpose? So what philosophy helps us to do is find answers for the big questions in life. But not only that, but it also helps us to master ourselves. Well, we have struggles in life in terms of our purpose, in terms of our thoughts, in terms of how we deal with people, the struggles in life, how we deal with death. So the whole purpose of philosophy is to help us better position ourselves when it comes to the major struggles in life. And one thing that's very interesting, Fred, because very often people think about philosophy as an exercise of reason only. But when we think about Plato, when you think about Confucius, when you think about Aristotle, even when we think about the big philosophers of all time, they're pretty much almost sages or seekers of the path. So you could think about Plato as a mystical. He went all the
Oh,
way
yeah.
to actually delve into the mysteries of ancient traditions. So it's not only about thinking, but it's about an inner discovery. So it's actually a combination of inner practices and also of bringing more enlightenment to the way we think. Because if we change the way we think, we change everything. Because it's what we
Absolutely.
think that defines all around us. There is one thing very interesting that we often say that we deal with philosophy as philosophy of the causes. I don't know if you're familiar with that term.
No.
Philosophy of the causes means that everything that we see, and that's what Plato would say, it's actually a reflection of archetypes, of things that we have in our minds. So if we change the way we think, we change the way we perceive the world, we change everything we do. So that's all about that, finding the underlying causes of existence.
Got it. I remember the cave myth from Plato, which is so brilliantly explained by one of New Acropolis's most popular teachers, if not the most popular teacher, Lucia Helena Galvão. For those that speak Portuguese, know who I'm talking about. She's become a viral sensation in the last decade or so, and she introduced thousands, if not millions, of people to philosophy for the first time, myself included, because I had studied it in high school, but it was almost like reading dead language and dead information. And she brought it to life in such a powerful way that it really turned me on to rereading the classics and finding almost like a shortcut to the essence of their teachings, you know?
Absolutely.
So Yeah, go ahead. I was going to bring all this back to the philosophy of the causes and the archetypes, but feel free to interrupt me if you were going to say something else.
No, what I was going to say is when you think about philosophy, there is a way of thinking about it in simpler terms, and that's what the Acropolis does, which is pretty much bring philosophy to our everyday life. And of course, there is Plato, but there is also the Stoics. The Stoics are quite popular in the US
Right.
at the moment.
They are, indeed.
And it's pretty much, I really like Stoic philosophy. When you think about Seneca, for example, Seneca, he has this very beautiful book that's called On the Shortness of Life. What he tells us is that life is not short, it's just that we do not live well enough. So let us say, take this very moment and we experience it deeply, and we're present and we're connected and we're really into what we're doing. We're living life. And let us say if we actually lived life all the time like that, which is very difficult, because we disconnect, we connect, we disconnect, we connect, we
Right.
disconnect in terms of our inner
Right.
consciousness. But if we are connected to everything we're doing, if we're present in this very moment, life actually gets much longer because we're experiencing it. So this is very practical. In the world we live today, people are rushing all the time. Sometimes they go home and they find they're just going around the clock without much purpose. So I think the whole purpose of me being here is helping people to reconnect with their own purpose and a higher sense of what is it that they are doing here, so they can better live their lives and have happier lives. Philosophy is all about seeking happiness as well and our place in the world. So the more understanding we have of things around us, of who we are, the happier we are. There
And
is
so,
one
how
very
are go ahead, go ahead. I was going to start asking about how the course structure is in New Acropolis, but finish your thought, and then we'll go to the structure of the courses.
What I was going to tell you was that there was this famous theosophist called Elena Blavatsky. She was actually the founder of the theosophist movement. And she has this beautiful book, which is called The Voice of the Silence. And she says, many people will just go around in circles suffering. But if at some point they ask, why am I suffering? All the suffering will not have been in
In
vain.
vain. Yeah.
Of people are actually finding why is it that I'm suffering, and that is very philosophical because then it turns people to look inside and think about the meaning of life, and then suffering makes sense because it helps us grow and evolve. I think very often we have a very superficial view of life, meaning that we just want pleasure and happiness all the time without understanding that struggles are also part of life, that we need to embrace them and just develop inner strength in order to live everything the life brings.
Would this approach to life about just pleasure and pleasure seeking be an Epicurean way of wanting to live life?
That's actually very interesting because I would say actually we distort, the
Okay,
Epicurean.
that's what I'm doing right now. I'm distorting the legacy of Epicurus. I just destroyed it in one sentence. Please
That's
fix it
no,
for us,
no.
Professor.
What happens is that Epicurus actually talked a lot about higher types of pleasure. So let us say if we explore the pleasure of temperance, of dominating ourselves, the
Right.
pleasure of being just, the pleasure of understanding. So there is pleasure in all of that. So it's not about
Fantastic.
letting our senses just go astray and do whatever they want, but it's about us finding the right measure of pleasure. So pleasure can actually be a guide because when we eat well and just right about right, we feel good. When we overeat, that does not feel good. It actually does not bring us pleasure. It brings us pain. So we actually do not live even by Epicurean philosophy, right? Because we need to find the right pleasure. So it's about finding the right pleasure, and it's about finding higher types of pleasure in music, for example. I know you're a musician. You know, there is
Indeed.
high degree of pleasure in listening to music and appreciating music, but that's about the pleasures of the soul, not only about the pleasures of the senses. And I believe today we're overdoing the pleasures of the senses, and we
Right.
are not enjoying enough the pleasures of the soul. And that's why people are so empty. They're looking
It
for filling the void of emptiness in our society today with many things
it's
that just do not do any good for them.
it's something that heard from a very respected elder mentor teacher of mine who was a fantastic spiritist leader. He says, "We are here to spiritualize matter and not let matter animalize the spirit."
That makes a lot of
So I,
sense. What I was going to say, Fred, and that's something I really like about philosophy, we're whole. So we need to work at every dimension that we have. There is a very interesting framework that we use from Indian philosophy in the Acropolis that talks about human beings actually having 7 layers of consciousness,
seven.
which 7 layers of consciousness, which is actually quite interesting, which means that we need to work at every level in order to have harmony. So it's about being healthy. It's about learning how to deal with our energy, learning how to deal with our emotions, learning how to deal with our mind, and having all of that get balanced and tuned to our higher self, which is our soul. So I think it's all about that. Philosophy is about making a bridge between heaven and earth, because we're beings that have a soul, but we are here in this world, and we need to make sense of spiritual life in this very moment with all the challenges that we have. So it's really about making that link between higher self and lower self and harmonizing all aspects of our life. And I think then we have a path that really touches all aspects of life. Because very often, people who look for a spiritual path, they're very focused on one dimension. They're thinking
Right.
about inner practices, meditation, or just philosophy as a rational exercise, or just appreciating art and beauty. But it's all, we need all of it. We need to be here grounded and take care of our physical health. We need to be connected with people. We need to appreciate arts and beauty, which has to do with our emotions. We have to develop a clear type of thinking, which is quite rational and organized. And we need to be connected. We need to be present. We need to feel unity, which is very spiritual. So we need to do it all.
And Melissa, I think it's important for people to understand how New Acropolis was first established, and if you do any type of curating of the philosophy types that you prioritize in your teachings, or if you do a more of a historical, chronological, complete, exhaustive, comprehensive look at all of the history of philosophy across the world, or do you prioritize specific types of philosophies? So how did it all start?
Fred, it started in Argentina in 57. And then it spread to many different countries. Now we are in over 50 countries in the world. And what we do pretty much is a comparative study of traditions, both from the West and East traditions, which is very important because very often we think about philosophy as a Western tradition that was born in
Right,
Greece. But
in
that's a
Greece.
limitation. That's not it. I mean, there is philosophy in China, there is philosophy in India, there is
Sure.
philosophy in all ancient civilizations. So what we do is a comparative study. And what is the major frameworks or schools of philosophy that we do? We pretty much in our course have three major subjects, which is ethics, social politics, and philosophy of history. Under ethics, we do Bhagavad Gita, ancient Indian tradition. We do the voice of the silence, which is ancient Tibetan
Blavatsky.
text. Exactly. We do Egypt, So we talk about Maat, which has to do with the archetype of justice. We do Confucius, Chinese tradition. In social politics, we look at Plotinus, which was an ancient Neoplatonic philosopher. You look at Plato, we look at the Stoics. So it's a lot of philosophers that we look at, which makes the course really ample and really mind opening and eye opening, which I think it's really great.
So under social politics is the second component, right? The second
Yeah.
tier that you mentioned. Do you go into the history of politics, or is it more on the sociological front? How is that structured?
Fred, we pretty much talk about politics, but as an archetype, meaning it's a way of looking at how we can better live within one another. So we explore politics from a very practical point of view. It's about us coexisting and learning how to better live with one another. So we look from that angle, but we also look a lot at Plato. We explore one classical book of
The
Plato, which is called
Republic,
The
right?
Republic. Exactly. Very, very popular, very classic. And what we do is pretty much look at what Plato talked about, the education of the politicians, in his mind, in his worldview. And he talks about the importance of educating both with music, it's something that you would appreciate a lot, and gymnastics, because music has to do with sensitizing the soul to everything. So, and for him, music was not only about the muse euterpe, which is the muse of music itself, but it was actually about all the different types of arts and knowledge. For example, astronomy comes into music, or history comes under music, or a tragedy comes under music. So all different types of art come into music. And then he would say, teach first music, because then you sensitize, you incline our souls towards goodness. And if they can feel that vibration of just being good and in peace, when you come and introduce philosophy, high ideals, they're going to recognize by the way those ideals vibrate in who they are, because they're going to be sensitive enough to those high ideals. And then he goes, teach music first, and then introduce gymnastics. Gymnastics has to do with the ability of struggling and going with power and with a lot of energy, and that's important as well, because then it's about being sensitive, but it's also about being pragmatic. It's about going out in the world and make things happen. So it's really a combination of both
And
types of
it's
words.
like it's like balancing the ultimate archetypes of the sun and the moon in us, the feminine and the masculine, right? You could say, perhaps.
You could say that, Fred. I believe, I really like, I'm sure you're familiar with the Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah in the Tree of Life has this very interesting idea behind, which is balancing both types of energy. So we need reason and judgment and, strength and all of that, but we need love, we need compassion, we need all of that. And it comes in the middle as harmony. So all
Fantastic.
of us, we're inclined to one side or the other as our own nature. And I think what philosophy helps us do is uh, accept both evil and good,
Quote
both
unquote.
sides of life, which is pretty much what is, death, difficulties. It's all part of life. So there is not devil as such, but there is just life as it unfolds and evolves. So we need both. And I think what philosophy helps us to do is a synthesis. So it's not about I am good and all the rest, is not worth it. But it's about us finding that every little creature in nature has its own role, has its own path, has its own nature. And we can learn from everything that is here. And I think that's a
And
very good way of looking at things.
And it also helps to make it also help continue to be like always curious and always avid for more, because I think philosophy opens the door to asking more questions rather than necessarily finding the answers, whereas religion, for example, is concerned with providing answers. And many times those answers are clear cut, they're not meant to be questioned, and then they become dogmas, and then people blindly follow them, and to certain extents, in extreme cases throughout history and in places in the world, they will even kill in the name of those truths, that they've embraced those truths to be absolute truths, and then they'll go out and commit atrocities. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think there's been a single philosopher in history who's been able to achieve this kind of tragedy, right?
I hear you, and I agree with you that religions are based on dogmas that very often are not questioned, and people do, many evil things in the name of religion. I totally agree with you. But at the same time, I'm going to challenge your,
Good.
question you on something, which I think it's quite interesting. But when you look about the dogmas that we have in every tradition, the thing is, they do not explain to us why is it that the dogmas exist, but there is an
In the first
explanation
place.
of them, you know, in the sense
Right.
that the dogmas very often, that's very interesting. They talk a lot about life's laws, but in a symbolic way. And we interpret those dogmas in a very superficial way, and that's why they seem so absurd.
Right.
But let us say, if you talk about the dogmas, and you think about the dogmas in a philosophical way, there are answers for them and there are explanations for them. And the more we study, what we realize that religions are not as original as they claim to be.
Right.
you know, there is this book by Blavatsky that I was mentioning. She talks about symbology of different traditions. And when we look at this about the symbols in Assyria and Babylonia in the Middle East, it's all in the Bible, but no one tells us because the myths were much older. They're much more ancient. So you see that the same archetypes and the same ideas, they get repeated over time, but with different names and with different twists. And as you realize that there is no reason for being a fundamentalist by your own view of the world, because it's all out there, spoken in different ways, and things are called by different names. So what we try to do is look at the essence of religions, at the essence of ideas, which is the archetypes, the laws of nature. And if we're able to do that, we do we can dialogue with any type of tradition, any type of religion. And I think that's the beauty of it, being able to dialogue and respect any type of religion or creed, because there is all some degree of truth behind, so we need to
Right.
look at that and try to find out what is it that it's a hidden, truth or mystery that we need to dig in and find more about.
Yeah, I love that because I used to watch Joseph Campbell on PBS talking about the hero's journey and searching for meanings, myths, archetypes. And it's always an open-ended conversation that leaves us more fascinated in the end at how things converge. The more you study the history of philosophies, religions, and peoples, you see how they basically all converge into just a handful of essential truths, but presented in a variety of different ways. And I believe that's kind of what New Acropolis aims to show the students after they've been with the school for a while, right? That in the end, it's pretty much we're all talking about the same thing, but in different ways, right?
Absolutely. And I think there is an important component there, Fred, which does not have to do only with understanding the myths and different traditions, but living the myths
Nice.
internally. Because, for example, if you actually leave the hero's journey to a certain extent, try to overcome your challenges and live up to higher ideals and serve the world and fight dragons, in the name of something higher. You're the hero become self or herself, which means that you can relate to different religions, traditions, and myths. I think what happens is that when people study those different myths, sometimes it's too mind oriented in the sense that, okay, let me understand that at a very rational way. But I think it has to be lived, because if it's not lived to any extent, you will not find understanding, deep understanding of what's behind the myths. We study symbology here in Acropolis. And one thing that I find difficult overall is that students have a hard time to abstract and think about higher ideas and etc. Because we're very much grounded and very practical and down to earth things. So that's a common problem. But added to that, I find there is a need of living that inside, as a path. And that's why it's so internal and it's just so personal. We can transmit the knowledge, but the way each one of us is going to live it, it's a personal matter. And each one of us has its own scenario of experience that we need to make use of in order to learn. And life is very rich in terms of scenarios and challenges and experiences where we can use to practice our ideas and philosophies. So I think, there are so many opportunities for us to be philosophers in our everyday life. So it's all about that, practicing philosophy in our everyday lives.
And just so that we're clear, New Acropolis does not aim to produce professional philosophers, right?
Yeah. New Acropolis is a non-for-profit organization that's everywhere. And we are all volunteers in New Acropolis, the professors of philosophy. So it's not about a professional philosopher in the sense of just being a student, someone who teaches philosophy as a way of living, but it's rather teaching people about the greatest wisdom of all time so that people can live by it. So it's really open, and who knows, sometimes in the future you can be a professor in Acropolis in the US.
Hey, that
Come and
sounds
join
pretty
us.
cool.
I'm sure
Well,
you would
there's
enjoy that.
oh, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a track for people to follow. And I think in a way you've done the hard work of sort of sparsing through everything that's out there so that we could make sense of the teachings in a more methodological way. And I mentioned this, for example, because you talk about living something, living the myth, actually living for a while inwardly an idea before you just rationalize it by reading in a book, right? And I can never forget during the pandemic, in the height of the pandemic in New York City, in the beginning of it, we were all desperate, not knowing what was going to happen to us. I stumbled across New Acropolis's videos by Professor Lucia Helena Galvão, specifically on the book study that she did, which was a whole series of videos on The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And I'll never forget the level of depth that she was able to get into each chapter by unpacking the symbolism of each chapter. And for people that just read the book from cover to cover, they might get 20%. But with the help of her explanations into the symbolism of all of the metaphors, the analogies, the things that he meant, it's gave it a whole new meaning, a whole new fragrance, if you will. So how can people sign up to the courses, Melissa? How can people join, basically?
There we go. Fred, as you know, we are quite big in Brazil, and we already have chapters in the US, but we're expanding now in New York and in Florida. So you can access our Instagram, which is New Acropolis USA, and then you're going to find all the links so that you can sign up there. And you can also share the links after we are done with our conversation so people can sign up. We are actually starting the course this week. So it's going to be every Thursday at from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So you're welcome to join, and everyone who's here watching us is welcome to join. And let me tell you one thing that has to do with your provocation on the prophet that Lucia was able to share with everyone. We need masters, we need instructors, we need guidance. The thing is, there is a lot out there for us to make sense of. So if there is a methodology, if there is a path, we move much faster. And we need a community. We need to exchange practices. We need to be together in order to get stronger. So it's all about that. What I often see, Fred, in seekers of the big questions in life, is that they go everywhere and they study a lot of things, but they're not able to put the different knowledge they have together and make sense of it all. And I think what we help people to do, and I think that's very precious, to be honest, is to help make a synthesis and put things together. By understanding the fundamentals of the philosophy, the way we explain in Acropolis, you're going to be able to go into many of the traditional books and understand that much better, because you're going to know the fundamentals. You're going to know the basic ideas. You're going to know.
It's almost like providing them a roadmap to look for the guideposts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And also by provoking people to leave the teachings. Because one thing that's important to say, I mentioned we're volunteers. So it's also a call to contribute and to serve, and as we're part of a community, we need to find our own role and live philosophy in our daily life and contribute in the way we can. So we also invite people to join us, and we have a lot of projects and things happening. So it's a way of also contributing and joining and being a part of it. So it's a school of philosophy where people enjoy the proposal, they become members, and as members, there's a lot of things taking place and a lot that can be lived, and it's really a path that helps us evolve and grow much faster because we have assistance and a framework and friends in the way and structure, and there's a way. It's a path.
Absolutely. I wonder, Melissa, was New Acropolis structured perhaps by modeling the way the ancient Greek schools of philosophy were modeled in any way?
Absolutely. When you think about the Pythagoras school, when we think about the Plato school, when we think about Aristotle's school, they're all schools, as we call them, in the classic tradition, which means that they tried to live by the teachings they had. They lived in a community. I really like the Pythagorean way of living. So, they woke up early, they did their practices, they're all together, and then they went out to do their business, have their work, and they gathered around the fire, perhaps in the evening, to practice philosophy, to learn about the mysteries of life, to do art and music. What the ancients would call the divine oshes in the sense of not doing anything, but in Portuguese would be like costume. I don't know in English how to call it. But it's about
divine idleness, perhaps being idle.
Well, it's actually, it had to do with having the right time to devote to philosophy and the arts. And I think that's a beautiful way of living, which is cultivating philosophy, and of course working and being the family, which is not only about mother and father and kids, but it's about a community. So it has very much of a community spirit in New Acropolis, and the classic schools of philosophy had the very same way. When we think about philosophy today, we think about academia, but the ancient schools of philosophy, they're not academic schools. They're just there were communities who gathered around knowledge, and they had a higher purpose.
Very practical, right?
Very practical, very down to earth, very much about improving oneself and putting oneself at the service of the world. So you had to do a lot with that, which is very different today when you think about academic exercise.
Right. Yeah, and especially now we're doing this conversation around the fire. For those that are going to be watching this, who knows, later in the future. This is 2025 right now. We are in the midst of being bombarded by social media on all fronts with nonstop stimulation, which is decreasing our attention span to be able to actually read books at length. not only myself, I know so from so many friends who report the same thing. They're around my age in their 40s. They say, I used to read so many more books in my 20s. I've been having a harder time reading now because of the social media stimulus, because of our phones, the addictions that we have to the dopamine hits of very short, bite-sized information. And I think that this makes us overall, while it may give us exposure to a bunch of more things, but 90% of it useless information, it also makes us more shallow in the sense of truly ingraining and truly rooting into things that take a while to digest, to absorb, to truly be metabolized in our hearts and our spirits for those insights to come up. Because you mentioned the austere, the idleness. When you read the biographies of many inventors, scientists, artists, and composers, many times they report that it was while they were having a quiet walk in nature, or when they were suddenly by themselves in introspection, which is when the insight, the epiphany, the eureka moment hit them. And we need to be able to make space for that, make room for that in the way we live life today, right?
Fred, there is so much power in silence, just being silent and just listening to yourself and to nature around us. We have overly active minds, and that's a problem. And that makes us exhausted by just thinking all the time and just running all the time. There is another way of using our minds. It is, as we call it, in a receptive way. Receptive meaning that, think when you have to, but do not think all the time. It's about contemplating a little more and just seeing what's out there so we can actually exercise and make decisions out of something that's more profound and not just being reactive. Because if we're just thinking all the time, we're being reactive all the time. We're just doing up to do what it has to be done all the time, rushing all the time. And that's not smart. Because when we're a little bit more idle inside, not being, just idle in the sense of being receptive, and open and seeing things, we're smarter because we have intuition, we are present, we can see things as they are. So it is much better. And I agree with you. I think this whole rhythm that we're having now is just unnatural and unhealthy. And I think that's certainly one of the reasons why so many people are suffering from mental health issues, because they're just not having time enough with themselves, with nature, to process life. One practice that we often recommend in the Acropolis is to keep a planner. Not a planner, I'm sorry, a journal. So that you can actually, a journal, so that you can actually think through every day about what you have gone through and distill the lessons from your experience and have the time to digest and incorporate what you have experienced. Because over in the course of one day, there's just so many things that we experience. But my question is, how many things of those that we experience we actually take to our hearts and actually become ours in terms of lessons, in terms of things that are worth living by, things that make sense to us that we're going to be using the next day? We don't. So life becomes superficial. We go everywhere, we do many things, we talk a lot, but what remains? Very little.
It ties back to what you mentioned about Seneca's book, right? Life is short because we really don't have the calmness, the inner calm to actually become stationary for a second, ground in the present moment, and truly savor it. And then it becomes long. We're so rushed, right?
Yeah, it's like almost bringing eternity to the present moment, in the sense of, going deep into whatever you have to do. And I think that's almost a lost art that we need to reconnect with. And that's our purpose. But doing that, Fred, in a conscious way, uh, you know, it's very good to have our rational mind working. And we need to combine both intuition and our rational minds. And I think that the challenge that we have, it's not only about feeling and being present, but it's about understanding as well. So it's about both, both sides of the brain, both, aspects of the tree of life, it's incorporating everything. It's about very, very intuitive, but at the same time, very clear in whatever you think. And it's about being grounded, but at the same time, connecting to higher ground. So it's about, doing everything. And I think that's being whole.
Yeah, living a wholesome life, exactly. Not just read this the other day, which I really loved. Most people listen with the intent to respond. Few people listen with the intent to understand.
That makes a
And I
lot of
think that's
sense.
a huge difference, because when you listen with the intent to understand, you're placing yourself at the other person's feet. You're being truly receptive and empathetic to what it is that that moment is offering you as a teaching. Because to go into the spiritual a little bit here, every moment has a lesson to teach us, but we need to be available and aware of what it is. And in order to do that, we need to have the silence of the mind, like you said. And so journaling, I think, is one of those many great tools to help us empty out every day. And
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think what we need, there was one professor from Acropolis, actually our director here in Brazil, he's great. And he tells us something very interesting about discipline. That discipline has not to do only with waking up early and doing things as we have planned, but it has to do discipline with the practices that you have to keep yourself in the center, to keep yourself well, to keep yourself, as you should be. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. So, what is the discipline you have, not only to earn money, but what is the discipline you have to be a good person, to be happy?
indeed,
Like a journal, like walking in nature, like talking to people, like connecting to life. So, those things have to be done as a discipline. We need to find way to do things that matter. People sometimes they want to make time to do nothing, make time to do, I don't know, not anything that matters, for their soul. It's just to waste time for things that would just not lead you anywhere. So I
right.
think we need to make room in life for what matters. And I think what matters the most, I can't think of anything that matters the most than finding the meaning of life so that we can actually lead a more meaningful life. And that's all
And
about that.
living, like you said, harmoniously. This word harmony really struck me when you were explaining a little bit of the principles behind a new Acropolis, to find that harmony within. And of course, it ties me back to music. Just for example, I have to talk about music, something that I know a little bit more about. If you go back to Europe in the late 1700s, the percentage of the population that was literate in a musical instrument was the majority. It wasn't just the wealthy, but the majority of the people knew how to read music, knew how to play a musical instrument. Imagine what that does for the heart, for the soul, for a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. When I'm not only able to just listen to music, but I'm actually able to create and make music, express through an instrument harmoniously with other people, something that is written in front of me with little notes and staffs that I can actually understand. And you fast forward to 2025, which is when we're doing this recording, and the percentage of people who can actually read music and play a musical instrument is so much lower, and yet we're so much more technologically advanced. So it speaks to that quality of making us a little more sensible, a little more softer around the edges, to truly find a better balance in our life that has to do with this inner meaning, a deeper meaning, rather than simply, I want to find more money, I want to find more money, I want to earn more, I want to have more, consume more.
Absolutely. One thing that you're raising, Fred, that I think it's very interesting is when you do music, you stop, you focus, you're there, feeling the moment. And I think there are a lot of other experiences that we have that helps us with that as well. When you do artwork, when you do crafting, when you do things that have to do manual work. I think a lot of those help us do that, which is to center. Ancient traditions did a lot of calligraphy, the art of doing calligraphy. So I think that has to do with culture in the best sense of the term. And when you actually stop to cultivate yourself, because culture has to do with that, cultivation of the earth, cultivation of your inner soul. So we need more culture in the right sense of the term,
Beautiful, beautiful.
cultivating ourselves and giving us time to do that. We spend like hours, just going deep into one artwork that we want to do instead of just rushing all the time. I think that's much needed for our own health, our own balance, and our own
Indeed.
happiness. We need to rescue that a little bit away from the screens, a little bit away from the social media, and just more inwards, in silence, so that we can actually experience life more deeply and look inside. One thing that I find in a lot of my students in Acropolis sometimes is they have a hard time to look inside because it is difficult to do so. So they run away. So you go home, you turn on all the social media, all the noise, because it distracts you from being with yourself and thinking through about what needs to be processed. And we need that, look inside with less fear, and so that we can actually integrate our experiences and live more wholesome lives, I think.
Well said. Well said, Melissa. Well, here's hoping that New Acropolis can take over the United States in every way, shape, and form so that many, many groups can be formed. These are intentional communities that gather to grow and to become more masters of themselves, right? And I think the supportive element of a community is really what makes the whole difference here in the experience. So I really hope that you and everyone who's leading the charge in the English speaking world can really gather as many people as possible. And for those that are watching, in the description of the video, you have New Acropolis USA's website where you can sign up because tomorrow they're going to start a new course and you can be a part of it with Melissa and other faculty and be a part of a community of people that wants this harmony through philosophy, which is for me personally speaking, pretty unique and innovative way to gather intentionally. Because for a majority of my life, I was focused on this type of gathering for a religious purpose, which was also great. In the devotional aspect of it, I learned a ton. I read hundreds of books. But there's a different element when you put philosophy in the mix because it keeps it more open ended, rather than being what we hear this word spoken a lot in the U.S. It's not a cult. There's no guru. There is no you need to follow the guru and follow certain principles and change things in your life and don't question it. And it's all about the guru. There's none of that here. So it's a breath of fresh air in many ways.
Yeah, well, we're very excited to this journey now in terms of teaching philosophy in the US, and I'm looking forward, for that. Welcoming your viewers here and also yourself. I hope you can join us as well.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be there in the course tomorrow. Any final thoughts and words, Melissa, that you'd like to leave us with?
Just one final word. You mentioned about us finding harmony inside. And of course, it's all about that. But at the same time, as we find harmony inside, we're also able to share outside. And I think it's all about us spreading that the best we have in the world. So I strongly believe, and that makes a lot of sense to me, and it's very true, that the more we evolve, the more we see, the better we are, the more we can do, the more we flourish, the more we can share with the world. And I think it's not only a personal need, but it's a world's need that we need to evolve and find new answers for a world that's just so troubled with so many challenges. So it's an invitation not only from an individual point of view, but it's an invitation for a world that needs it. And I think we should look at that as well as a need of our current time so that we can actually be better and serve better in the world where we are. Thank you.
If I had a glass of wine, I would say I'll drink to that. Cheers to that.
There we go. Cheers.
Well said. Melissa, thank you so much for being here around the Fire on Spirit Reflections. Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure you check out New Acropolis. Follow them in their social media, YouTube, Instagram, so that you can be a part of this philosophy journey, which is really deep. And I personally will be there tomorrow, and I look forward to it.
There we go. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.